Hi, René here. Before I talk about the most deadly sins of the JA30, let me introduce my speakers to you. They are custom-made, based on the Tannoy Kingdom 18, whose dual concentric jazzes come very close to a one-point source and therefore have almost no phase shifts. They can reproduce spatial information better than many a modern speaker. They are therefore predestined to uncover the absolute insufficiency of the JA30 to render the best part and the greatest gift high-end has to offer. And that is the miracle of space in stereophonic recordings. Should you have any doubts about the exquisite abilities of the Tannoys in this respect, please watch the following excerpt from a video by Mr. Adrian Lowe from Audio Excellence Canada, which he kindly allowed me to use.
Back then, in 1997, David Wilson introduced the Wilson Grand Slam X1, or called X1 Grand Slam. That speaker was the most expensive speaker they offered other than the WHAM. The Grand Slams were $65,000 US. These cost more than the Grand Slams. This was one of the very, very finest speakers that you could buy at that time, and still is one of the best speakers certainly ever made.
Backed up by this statement, I dare say that 50% of the 3D information, or even more, is gone when you use a Jadis amplifier. You do not only lose more than half of the information about the placement of singers, musicians and instruments, you also lose the characteristics of the room acoustics. As I explained in my previous video, Jadis makes all musical genres and above all singers sound the same, at least to a degree, and that makes the Jadis mishmash so boring even after a short while. This shocking result and a disappointment about the absolutely unacceptable quality of the JA30 reminded me of a scene from the 1980 Kubrick movie hit The Shining. Do you remember? The protagonist, Jack Nicholson, falls in love with a seductive lady lolling around in a bath tube, like I fell in love with the JA30 lolling around in a shop. The movie character and me, we have a lot in common. In the very moment when Jack is about to kiss her, he feels that something is wrong and notices her body is decaying. Unfortunately, we all are misled at some points in our lives. If you want to avoid the bitter experience of finding out you purchased a total fail for a lot of money, you should use revealing test tracks before you buy. There are many compilations of allegedly or really disclosing compositions and songs, but let me add one more, which turned out to be especially suitable to show the differences between two pairs of monoblocks, a Chinese pair for $3,500, including shipping from China, and a French pair for 3 times the price. These tracks work precisely like snipers and disgrace the loser easily. For those who are not facing a showdown between devices they want to buy sooner or later, the presented musical pieces can work as a list of interesting recommendations to add to your collection of CDs and LPs. Let's start with the most difficult part, which is in most cases classical music. Rodrigo, Concierto de Aranjuez. The guitar concert was a favorite of mine for many years, and I own quite a few versions of it, but in this case I used a transcription of the second movement for violin, which is played by Anastasia Chebotarova, accompanied by the quartet of the Russian Symphony Orchestra. It's available on LP and CD. The piece begins with the finely chiseled flickering of the bowed instruments, then a slender cello presents the opening tune, followed by the violin and the guitar next to it, which is incredibly detached from the rest and never gets entangled with other instruments. At 2:30, the piano joins in, makes its tunes flare up in sparkling garlands. There is no overlapping, no interference of notes. You can literally see the piano occupying its proper space on the stage next to the musicians. Swap. The cello is a bit oversized and therefore aggressive now. The violin is hard-pressed to deliver its cantillinas. The hovering lightness of the guitar is rather a strumming of the chords. Its contours are vaguer, blurred by some reverberations. The stage is contained in a single slice of the bread with nothing but darkness in the background. The instruments are harder to locate because of a halo effect. There are fringed or bleeding borderlines which are typical of aquarelles. The final crescendo is rather a rivalry instead of showing team spirit. The top dressage for any setup are, of course, the big orchestral works. Nothing else is so difficult to reproduce. We take a composition by Jules Massenet, Le Cid. Ballet music, movement 5, Catalane. I listened with this reference recording with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. The orchestra is spread out like a vast landscape overlooked from an elevated point of view. What does a helpless Muzzy amplifier like the JA30 do? When it can't arrange the musicians in a multi-layered placement from front to back, it will try to stack the slices of toast, respectively the musical layers, wherever it can. A real treat for the discerning listener are the brass attacks in the Catalane. The musicians should be firmly rooted like nails hammered into a piece of wood and send their powerful phrases across the stage towards the audience. With the wrong amplifier, this noise can bank up into looming masses, butchering and massacring the innocent, deplorable musicians like a line of military tanks, and finally charge at the audience terrifyingly like a wave of mud, just to dissolve in the very last second, so that the listener, with a sigh of relief, is happy to see the musicians unhurt and bravely continuing their work. The following 10-second clip is supposed to give you a faint idea of what I was going through. I was seized by an ecstatic force which took me back to my younger hi-fi years, where sheer volume meant intoxicating happiness. The veins on my forehead were bulging, and the sound of the trumpets of Jericho incited me to join the battle no matter who the enemy was. I hoped it was false information that the JA30 were to be blamed for this too much of a good thing effect. But in the very end I had to realize these tunes were only played by a single bass tuba and some horns and trumpets. The dream was over. Hi-Fidelity does not necessarily mean sheer brutal volume of sound, said a schoolmasterly voice in my head, and I nodded. Yes, I know, only some brass instruments, not the orchestra of the Day of Judgment. With the Chinese monoblocks, I got a much more realistic impression and had to accept the lesson. Now let's turn to pop music, starting with two French chansons. Fanny Bériaux, Cezanne from the CD Blow Up My World. With the Cefsius, the guitar sounded very natural, very unplugged. Fanny Bériaux sang with a softly restrained voice, sometimes almost whispering. I could identify her French accent. She seemed to be lisping a bit, which added a personal sexy note to her expression. Swap. Voice and guitar are too large now, almost double the size they were rendered with the Cefsius. I had a hard time to draw a clear picture showing the distance between the singer's mouth and the sound hole of the guitar. Because of the increased sizes, they are too close together. Maybe Fanny had to bend down because the obtrusive trumpet player was standing right above her, violating the rules of social distancing.
Je pense qu'elle s'en fout, en fait, de ce que les gens pensent d'elle.
Emilie-Claire Barlow, Jardin d'hiver. I'm talking about the orchestrated version, not the older one, with accompaniment of a guitar only, and therefore easier to reproduce. The Cefsius placed the singer neatly in front of the orchestra. The piano had a clearly assigned space within the orchestra. The partition of the bowed strings into smaller groups created a wave-like movement, with the waves clearly separated, whereas with the JA30 they flew into each other and sounded a bit muddled. How plagued we high-enders are. Why do we have to make a choice between Scylla and Charybdis in most cases, always in search of a device which can do the splits more or less perfectly? Amy Duncan, Your Very Soul. The title of the CD, produced by Lynn Records, is Cycles of Life. In the beginning, the area of the stage is defined only by a piano and the singer's voice, of course. Later, an organ, a cello, and some minor percussion effects come into play. The recording offers several horizontal layers, and an attentive listener can perceive how his ears are guided to move between these sectors. When we think of the stage as a pack of sandwiches, we automatically adjust to the different focal planes depending on the leading instruments therein. It's almost like the usual stereo effect, but turned around by 45 degrees. This phenomenon is easy to follow and to verify with the Chinese amps because of the filigrane transparency, which does not add a little bit to the recording, but hard to grasp with the Jadis, because of the artificially magnified reverbs added by the device. It seems that the idea to form a cluster for defense against customer claims also shows up in the formation of sound sources on a stage. There is little variation in the depth of field. Jazz. Tsuyoshi Yamamoto Trio, Yago. The piano claims the left half of the stage, and therefore, thanks to an appropriate microphone placement, you can hear whether the player is digging in the lower or in the higher registers. The brass of the cymbals creates a beautifully rich rustling. The drums sound really big to scale. No detail gets lost. It's not a pot of Irish stew cooked to death. It's a crispy mixture. But when the JA30 creates its typical artificial aura around each instrument, the sources mingle into each other, the piano has a touch of sardines in oil, and the multiple contrasts like bass with drums, drums alone, piano with bass, higher keys versus lower keys are equalized and change from thrilling to boring. It becomes entertainment jazz for a summer night party. Poor Mr. Yamamoto would be disappointed to hear that. What about the sizes of instruments and voices in general? Let's take Stormy Weather by Farrell. With the JA30, her voice is too big, and the solo parts of trumpet and saxophone show instruments blown up to a size of up to 4 feet in diameter, while the Cephsius present the openings of the wind instruments measuring only a few inches. Steve Strauss, on Looking for the Heart of Saturday Night, jumps from average stature to the size Elvis Presley had after his hamburger misuse and shortly before he died. Finally, a few words of mediation. The sound of the JA30 will, in spite of all the shortcomings I have demonstrated, fascinate a lot of people because it's a fun sound, no doubt about that. Who would like to dance in a disco when the music is straight and disciplined like a studio recording? People are inclined to prefer the more exaggerated style of presentation, and in many cases, a bigger and fatter profile will give the reproduction through entry-level or mid-fi loudspeakers an air of rich-sounding abundance and sonic power. That's absolutely okay, but it's not high-end. It's not even hi-fi, because Fi stands for fidelity, and adding a lot of cosmetic effects is the opposite of fidelity to the original.